Okay, I'll start again. Today we are going to talk about GitHub for documentation on how to use GitHub as a documentation tool for your unified projects. So this is the content, and let's start. So there is an idea called version control systems. So this has nothing to do with GitHub or Git or anything. Like the primary need for people to have their code backed up at different places. That was a need. Basically, you don't need to keep your code only on your computer because it might get deleted. And also, you want to make sure that if something goes wrong on a particular day of working, you can go back to the code that you had on the day before that. So one way people used to do that was creating these folders by the date and copying them to Google Drive or something. But that is not a very efficient method. So because like when you're typing something, you have final.pdf, final.pdf. That's a never-ending process. So people wanted something to do this better. So then came version control systems. The idea is you should be able to maintain a snapshot of a particular date and time of the code in your hard disk, and you should be able to come back to that place because it's very important when you break something to go back to where you had a working model. That is quite a useful feature. And then there was an idea called branches. We are not going to talk about branches in this presentation because it can get complicated, but the idea of branches is maybe you can work on the same set of files for a project, same code files, but you might be developing two independent features for the project. So whether you can branch out the project and come back. So that was an important feature of version control systems. And also you should be able to keep the backups. So snapshots and backups are two different things. Snapshots means daily you can make a snapshot of your code, daily or hourly or something, on the same place. Backups are keeping the code in different places because snapshots won't help in case your laptop gets stolen. So we needed backups. So version control systems were developed to achieve these targets. So Git is a very famous version control system. It is developed by Linus Torvalds. So he's the guy who wrote the Linux kernel and also Git. So this is more or less his second project because he saw a need for for a good version control system to maintain the Linux kernel project. And you can, if you read what he's saying about Git here, the gist of this idea is that there are no technical rules in Git, hard and fast technical rules, because there are multiple ways of doing the same thing, but people should figure out what the set of rules they can use, because there are multiple ways of doing it in technical sense, but in a human sense, in a group dynamic, you should figure out which tools of Git you are going to use and plan your project accordingly. You're not going to use everything in Git if you're going to get something done. You're only going to use what works for your team. So when we look at Git as a version control system, so there are some facts here and opinions. So the first two would be two opinions. It's very well designed. Like it's a very good software, but it has too many features and it's very difficult to learn. The learning curve is very steep. So that is an issue in Git. But if you look at the bigger picture, they have thought about everything and created a feature to do almost everything. And it's a decentralized system. What we mean by decentralized is, for example, think about like when you think about this version control systems and managing code for projects, you think of bigger companies where like they would usually like their code to be in one central server and people to take that code and work. But if you talk about like open source or very freedom oriented organizations, they wouldn't want this hierarchical structure. So Git by itself doesn't have a very hierarchical structure. You have a structure, but it's a decentralized structure. But Git can be used in hierarchical ways as well, as I told in the previous slide, by figuring out some rules to create a hierarchy out of that. But Git by itself is decentralized. and it is working very fast because it's written in C and C++. It's one of the very fast version control systems in the history. That's one of the reasons why Git became very famous. And Git has an idea called patches, where multiple people can work on the same project, and instead of giving the other person the whole code, you can give a part of the code, that the changed part, which is really good because then you don't have to send up across large file sizes. But this feature is also not in the scope of this presentation because we are using something called pull requests. Pull requests are not a feature in Git, but that's how this is being done at the moment in GitHub. So Git is something else and GitHub is something else. We'll come to that on the next slide. And the last point is also an opinion. When you are getting started with Git, so this does not apply to the students who are familiar with it and who are using it for a long time, but when you are starting, just pick a minimum subset of Git features, the minimum features that you can use as a group to get something done, and start working that way, and then learn more things on the go. There are very advanced features because Git is a very well thought out design. But if you think about getting all of them in the start, it's going to mess up your whole workflow. uh, to give you a basic idea about how complicated Git can be, so this is a diagram where you have 4 places where you have the same code. So there is something called workspace, which is the place where you write the code and edit it. And there is something in the middle called index. So we also call this staged area. Think of it like this. You write on a book on your table. That is kind of the workspace. But once you write it, you keep it somewhere in a bookshelf or something. That could be the staged area. Then there is something called local repository, which is again a place where you put the code, and then there is the remote repository, which is the GitHub copy. So this whole diagram is kind of complicated. So we are not going to think about this at the moment, but it's good to know this because if you want to learn more, you can go through this diagram and figure out what add is, what commit is, and everything. But this is an easier version of learning that. This is a simplified version where we have only a few things. So here also you have the working directory, which is the place where you write the code. Once you finish writing the code, you add it to the staged area. So adding is basically you make some changes in the working directory and you just add those things into the staged area. But then there is another step called commit, which means you put a little bit of information, what are the changes you did and everything, and then you put it to this local copy of the repository, the third one, by a commit. So we'll look into how these things happen in an example as well, but you put it here. Then you can send it to the copy on GitHub, which is the remote repository, by a push command. And then multiple people may be sending push commands to this. Once those things are done here, you can get it back by pull, and you can get it back from the local repository to your working directory by merge. So still this is a little bit complicated even if you look at this image, but at the end of this presentation, what we will be expecting you to do is add, commit, push, fetch, pull, and merge. So we expect you to learn these few commands: add, commit, push, fetch, pull, and merge as the basic workflow. So if you think about Git is a small thing, like it's a tool, but it's one thing. But when you talk about GitHub has so many other features as well. For example, GitHub has something called pull requests, which was not there or in original Git. So that is something you will be using frequently. And there is something called markdown rendering, which you will be using for documentation. And then there is something called GitHub pages, which you use for creating web pages. And then there is a file editor to write code on GitHub itself. And there are deployment tools for putting out your projects into the production stage after writing the code. So all these things together make GitHub. And Git is a free and open source thing that was written by Linus Torvalds, but GitHub is an organization, a profit-oriented organization, which happens to have free accounts with limited functionality. So these are two things. So GitHub is the more enterprise-oriented thing we see, but Git is the core technology. And for this presentation, we'll be learning about markdown rendering, GitHub pages, and a little bit about pull request. We are not going to talk about deployment tools or the file editor in GitHub. We'll be using the file editor, but we are not going to learn much about that. So the first thing is Markdown. Markdown is a language that you can create documents. So if you look at this, you can see it's not even as difficult as HTML is. It's even simpler than that. So Markdown syntax is one of the simplest forms of keeping a document. So there are other things what you can use for documentation as well. It should be HTML, LaTeX documentation, and there's something called Crof. Crof is also very similar to Markdown, but Markdown is kind of the simplest. So if you are going to keep notes, even if you're going to write notes in a text editor, rather than going for Word or OneNote, doing Markdown would be really easy. And you can even do complicated things like equations in Markdown, and you can keep references in Markdown. Like even in preparing a report for something, Markdown is a good language. But Markdown was also not created by GitHub. This is an independent documentation tool. So the process of rendering is basically taking this Markdown code and converting it to the PDF or the HTML version. So what GitHub Markdown is basically, you have a feature in GitHub where every document that has a .md extension will be automatically rendered into the HTML form of the document. So this is a interesting feature because you can do this thing very easily and create documentation for your code. So the first demonstration would be how to write a README on the GitHub website for a repository. So for that, I'm going to use our department repository, department organization, GitHub organization, which is github.com/ce.pdn.ac.lk, and create a new repository. Call it E16 temporary repository. And I can initialize with a README file or not. So I'll initialize with the README file for the time being because it's easier. I'll create it, and I can add anything here. I can, example, I can add a heading. I can add a subheading, and if we want, we can go for something like italic text or bold text. Let's do that. So when I commit the changes, I can write what I did. Before committing the changes, I would write wrong. So you can see it's rendered properly. So if we look at some good markdowns that were written here, let me start with local avoidance. So this is a markdown written by your group members, by your group. So they even have images in their markdown, and so this is and they have links here, so you can put even links and image. So you can let me show you the code. You can even look at someone's code and see how they have done that. That will be like, because it makes your life easier, you don't have to remember everything. For example, this is how they have added an image. You put the image URL here and image description here, preceded by exclamation mark. That would create an image. So markdown is a very easy tool to do. And the other good thing is, whenever you have the markdown file as readme.md, it appears automatically on this file explorer in GitHub. So that would be a good way to add documentation for the whole project as well as individual folders. For example, if I'm going to create an individual project folder here, so inside this folder also I have another markdown. So when I go to the project, I see this readme, and when I open the folder, I have the documentation for that folder as well. So this is a very useful way of doing documentation. Then we have this idea called GitHub Pages. GitHub Pages is another service given by GitHub, which is not in Git itself, for you to create your own website for free using GitHub accounts. So even if you have a user account or an organization, you can create your name.github.io web pages. So let's see how we are going to create this using an HTML. So for that, I have created an account. So my account name is E14158 ce.pdn.ac.lk. So that is my account name. So that for you, it might just be a name. It shouldn't be this long. I'm going to create a new repository, and I should name it exactly my name.github.io. So this is, you can have it as a private repository if it's your personal account, but if it's your organization, it should always be public. But I'm going to keep it public because it's easier. And then I will have a readme, and I create the repository. So this is going to be my website. So for the website, so this is the main like the root folder, and the branch is main. I would create, so you know, when you are creating a website, we need something called index.html. That is the main page. So I will so I can write some code for index.html and I can commit it. So when I go to settings, I have to switch on GitHub pages. So to switch off, it would be to put it to none. When I put the branch to main, it becomes a GitHub pages website. And by this, I say that the whole repository itself is a website, not any folder. The whole repository, the root folder, basically when you go to the repository, you have the index.html. And I have saved it. So here you can see here it says the environment is GitHub pages. That basically says this is working as a GitHub pages website. So if I go to this URL, you can see it has become a website. So that is the way to create a personal website for an account for yourself. For example, so our department organization has a similar account, GitHub pages website here, and it is you can see it. here. So you can see when you go to this repository, which is our department organization name .github.io, it has turned to a website. So the website and GitHub is a little bit different. Like, for example, you don't have to go into github.com. This is a separate website. So with that, now we know how to create a website for you with GitHub pages. Then the other thing is how to create project pages, which is basically if you have your main account, which is your name, inside that you might have separate projects for them to have individual websites. For that also I would go to our department organization, and let's say I'm starting a project. So this is what you are what you are doing in this thing. I'll tell unified. So I'm going to start a project. So this is going to be public, and I have readme, and I'm going to create that. So in the readme, I would write something like, what do you do? I would write how to run this code. Use Java 8, something like this. I would write it in the readme. Then I would have a folder. I would have a folder for code where I have main.java. Here I would have class main something. I will have the code here. So instead of just this, so one way for me to create a website for this project would be, I would have to go to my github.io website for the organization or the account and create a separate page for this. But I don't want to put this information in the main website. So then GitHub has given us another feature called project pages. There what I do is I create another folder called docs, and in that also I can create an index.html. So in the docs folder, I am going to write, this is a project sub. So I'm going to create this. So the difference is, in your main github.io site, you can just have the website. But here in this project site, you have the code and the documents and diagrams and everything. So I should ask GitHub to make this a project site. For that, what I should do is I should go and you can see it's not switched on by default. You have to select it's the main branch and say the docs folder is what should turn to a website. So when you click save, it's going to turn to a website. But the web URL would be, now the main website URL is this slash the project name would be, we have to wait a little bit for this to get deployed. So this is going to, so it's the website is working. You don't need to put this. It should originally work. At the moment, it's not working because my web cache is caching that. But you can see the website. So the idea is you can have the main website in one repository, which is the github.io repository itself. So what we are expecting you to do is, we are going to maintain this repository for the whole department work. But we don't let you play with this at the moment, because if 20 group starts putting information about their projects here, it will be messed up. So we want you to create your own repositories, and inside those repositories, we want you to write a README file to be visible for someone who is coming into GitHub. Then what you're going to do is you're going to put in the code and a separate website for the project. You have to write that code in HTML or any other thing you prefer. But for the outsiders, so when they see this, they wouldn't know that you are the people who are writing this website. They will think it is given by the department itself. But we are kind of splitting the labor between you and us, because you know more about your project, and instead of you having to show us all the code and get it accepted to go to the main repository, you do it on your repository and it's easily deployed. So that is how we do the GitHub pages for individual repositories. And the next thing we want to see is what is expected out of the documentation for your projects. So these are the requirements, the web page you create and the README. So this is what is expected out of you in this course. So you should have the project title and an image, and the table of contents, it should be something like what you see in Wikipedia, where you have the content first and again you have the things down. And introduction should be there, which is kind of an abstract, then the solution architecture, and you can see the things, and also the budget and the conclusion. So you can add these things on the go. For example, you wouldn't have the detailed budget and the conclusion right now, but you can write them later. But the good thing about GitHub is you can easily edit the things later. And another important thing to see here is when you are writing these things, so let's say you're going to write the content. So if you look at something like this, the content would be these things, right? For administrators, source code, hosted content, those are the subtopics. So you have to write them all here. But what is the link for that? So it is easily, you can easily see that by clicking here, you can see the link for a particular subsection. Those things you can write here. So when you are creating these websites, you can have multiple pages as well. For example, for the README, we prefer you to have one page with everything. But for the other things, which are the GitHub pages websites, you can have multiple web pages, videos, and everything. But we don't want you to put a video on the README, but you can put a video on the website. So then we can take a look at one or two, three websites and README files that you have created, just to get an idea. So this is a very long README file, but it's good. So you have most of the things here, and you can see you have even email links here, which are you can click and send an email. So this is mail to links. They are also possible in GitHub README, GitHub Markdown, and you have pictures. And so this is a very good practice. When you are on GitHub website looking at code, to have a link to the web page. So when you go to the web page, you have a link to go back to code. So that is an important thing to have, because if you are looking here, like they wouldn't know that this is a GitHub site sometimes, because we hope to hide this part and do something later. So it's very good to have a link to go back to code, and also from the code to go to the website. So you know there are two different things. And yeah, then we can go for a so the time is 46, so we have around 14 minutes. So we'll come up with a small mechanism that is kind of easy for a 3-person group to get started with. Before going to that, are there any groups who are using GitHub to manage their code? You can type in the chat if you are doing so, then we can look at how you have done it to start. if someone is already using GitHub for this, you can type the group name or the repository name here. Okay, so if we are to start, so I want to stress on this fact that this is not the best way to do Git for projects. This is not the most efficient way. This is one way that works. Probably you will figure out something that's better than this, but this is one way that works. So let's take a look at that. So the first rule is always create the repository in github.com's organization or group leaders account. Don't use init. Init is basically creating the repository on your computer and starting there. That's a little bit difficult. So this again, it's not difficult. That's not uh, what you're going to do in this workflow. So that doesn't work for this workflow. So what we are going to do is first create repository in organization. So I would go here. In the organization, I'm going to create a new repository called E16 and it would be public and would have a readme, and I'm going to create the repository. Now this is in the organization, it's not in a personal account. So the personal account I have on this tab is Gihanjalaka. So I created it here. It's not, it doesn't belong to me. So I created it, and then what I do is I am going to, so this is the first one. This is done. Now I am going to do the second one. I'm going to fork it to my own account. So I'm going to click fork from my account. And also I am going to fork it from my other account. So I always started on the organization. Now I have two remote repositories here. So what I do is I fork it. And these are on my personal account. But both these things are happening on GitHub. Then what I do is I have done that. Now I am going to clone the repository to my computer. So at the moment we are in this remote level. Everything we did is in the remote level. We have not come to the computer yet. So I am going to clone it. How I clone it is I copy this thing and I take the command line and I write git clone and I clone it. So I am inside that. And And so the other person using the GitHub repository, he's also going to cloning it to his computer. Now, what has happened is both these things are cloned to the computer. This is cloning. Now I have cloned it. Then I do the work on my computer. For example, if I am using this account, what I do is I might create a file called main.java, and I would write something on that. So this is not actual Java code, but I would write that. So after writing the code, what I would do is add and commit. So what is add and what is commit? You work on your directory, which is this folder. So after working there, you stage the changes you did by git add. So git add, and you put a dot to say you have to add everything in this folder. When you say add, even some, if you deleted a file, that change is added to the staged area. Then you commit it. What you mean by committing is you put some message what you did and you put it to your local repo. So if we are to be clear, now we have this, and we have the other thing and the working area. So this is a staged, and this is work. So I did the changes here. So when I was cloning, it came here as well as here. So cloning is a one-step process where you get all these three things. So I did the work here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add it. Add. Then after adding, I'm going to send it up another level by git commit. I'm going to put a small message, made a Java file, something like this. It goes. You can see one file has changed and 7 lines have been inserted. So this is now I do the adding and the committing part. It's also done. Now now what I have to do is I have to push it. Push it in the sense I have to take this to your personal account on GitHub. So what origin is and what main is, to explain those things. So main is the branch, but at the moment we are working with only one branch, so main is not going to change. And origin, the meaning is your local computer's repository's origin is where it was cloned from. So when I'm pushing it to my GitHub account, they're asking for my username and password. Now it has gone. Now if you see my repository, you can see the main.java is there. But if you look at the organization repository, it is not there. So to send it to the organization, what I should do is I should create a pull request, and I should say take from my one to the ce.pdn one, and I'm going to say what I did. I made a Java file and I create a pull request. So it's up to the organization to decide whether you are going to take it or not. So in the organization end, you have that, and you can take it. In the organization end, you can see the code is here. This is done. So now the time is for Isuru sir, should I continue explaining this or should we conclude?
We still have more time.
Okay.
We can go up to 5 if you want.
Oh, no, I don't need that much time. Okay. So I sent a push. I pushed it here. Then I am not sending the code here again. What I am doing is I am just asking them to pull it. What I do is I create pull request. So I request them to pull. The organization will accept the request. So now it's in the organization. So that's clear. Now let's think about the other person. So other person would also have a staged version and a working version. So now he's here. So he doesn't know what changed on the repository on the main organization. So one thing he would do is he would also create code.c. He will create that and he would write some C code. He would write this code. Then he would add this. He is going to push it there. His username is something else. He also does that. Now his repository has the C code and he's going to create a pull request for that. So you can see that we can send from our repository to even the other people's accounts, but never, like in this particular simplified workflow, we never do that. We always send to the organization. So created the pull request. So we always send up to the organization. That is the rule in this workflow. So I have the SQL. I'm going to merge it. Then now let's say I'm in my personal account. Now the organization has received pull requests from two places and he has both, but now my personal account doesn't have that. What I would do is I have written here merge pull request github.com. So what this means is you never do merging on your computer. You always do it on GitHub because that makes life easy in the first few weeks of learning GitHub. So there are other ways to do this, but for example, now what has happened is this code has gone here, 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 and it has also gone to here. Now I want to take it back. So what I would do is I would create a pull request for the other side. I would create a pull request from the organization. So when I select the organization here, things lose, things hide. So you have to click compare across rocks, and I'm taking back to my personal account. So I'm creating a pull request here to take the, I'll try taking the import. I'm going to then from my account. So I can request to be pulled from my account. Then I can also merge that request from my account, because I am doing both. I am asking to be okay. Now I have the code in my repository, both things in Gihanjan. So now I can, so this is that repository, the local one. What I do is, now I have it, I got it back here. Now I want to take it. So I can either take it here or here. But we have a rule saying we don't do any merging on the computer. So whenever we push something here, we don't write code and change anything for the time being until we push it, and we don't write code. Like if we write code, we always push them here, and then we wait for the pull request to come directly down here, because that's easy. But if you write code in the middle, it can get complicated. So the rule is to write your code, send the push it, and merge it to the organization, and get everything from the organization and directly get it down. This is not the only way of doing this, but this is an easy way of doing this. This is done by the command git pull origin name. So I'm going to do that. So you can see I have code.c and main.java both here, and it's here. So when this is coming down, it's getting committed as well. For example, you don't have to, when it's coming down, it's getting committed as well automatically. You can say you don't have nothing to commit because it's coming down all through all three. But the important thing to remember is, when you are doing this, like after sending the pull request and getting something to the repository, organization repository, until you make the pull from top to bottom, you don't commit anything in the middle. That makes your life easy in the learning phase. Later you can figure out how to do it in a more complicated way, but at the moment you don't make things complicated. You go this way, then you don't get any merge conflicts in your computer. You might get them in other places, but you don't get them in your computer. For example, now let's say we are on this personal By any chance, did I have my microphone on mute for the last some minutes?
Yeah, I didn't hear anything for about for a minute or two.
Okay, so when did so I was explaining, what was I explaining when did you lose the voice?
You explained what's on the slides. Then
Okay, which step?
the pulling part you explained.
Here.
No, in the slides, drawing that arrow with the dark color.
Okay. Uh, okay. So when we pull things down, since we don't do any confusing things in the middle, this is going to get pulled without any problem. But if you do changes in the middle, for example, you send the pull request to the organization and something happens in the organization, and you get it back, and then you pull it down to your workspace. So when you're pulling it back, it's going to the staged area as well as the local repository and everything. But this happen in a very streamlined way because there are no conflicts, because until from sending the pull request to the organization until getting back from the organization and pulling it down to your computer, you don't do any changes in your work. that is like that is like a rule that you can put on yourself to make your life easy. But later when you figure out how to do things in a more efficient way, you can do different things. But at the moment, let's go with this rule. So I wanted to know whether this workflow up to now is clear, so we can learn how to handle merge conflicts. But this itself is enough to get the project started. For example, if this is getting too complicated, maybe like stop here, let's digest this properly and ask the questions about this and clear them out before going to the next part. So if you have any questions, type them on the chat or ask with the microphone.
Guys, if you have any doubts, get them clarified while Nihan is here. Also, I gave you a template for your web pages. It's available on the fields page in our CO227 course. I also posted the link to the same thing in the chat here.
So to refresh, what I did was I created main.java in my local and code.c in the other local. Then what I did was I git add, git commit, git push. I created a pull request and merged it from the organization and took it there. Then I added the code.c, I committed it, I pushed it, and I merged it to the organization. Then what I did was I created a pull request to bring code.c here to my personal account on github.com. Then from a git pull origin main, I brought it down all these 3 steps at once. Why I can do that is because I have not added or staged or written any code until I do this. So ideally, if I am going to write something in this end, so if you don't have questions, we can talk about what would happen if I write something in this end. But to understand that, you should be clear about how this part happens. So do you want me to start that? Or do you need some time to understand this?
We can move on, Gina. They can ask questions if they have.
Okay.
They can stop you and ask questions.
Okay. Okay. So now let's say if I'll just delete this clone arrow because it's. So now let's say I am on this right end, and if I wanted to, before writing code, what should I actually do? I should create a pull request and get something from here. Then I should pull it down here and then work on it. But let's say I don't want to do that. So I am stressing this again. You don't have to do this if you don't like. You can go by the very basic approach and it works fine. That is like the best way to get started. But let's say I want to do something else. So what I would do is I also want to, I don't pull it back, but I create another Java file, main.java. Then I'm going to write some other Java code. Okay. I can do this, but this is not advised. I add it, I commit it. So now I have another main.java here, right? I'll keep it in bold. I added it, I committed it, but since Git is an decentralized form, they have no idea about these things until I get a pull request or something. Then I'm going to push this as well. So so you can see, so this personal for this computer, the origin is here. For this, the origin is here. So anyway, I send it here. Now, what I want to do is I want to send it to the organization. So I am creating a pull request from my one to organization. I am creating a pull request and I'm saying created a scan. Nice. But now the issues start. What happens is, if you go here, this is the organization. When you look at the pull requests, so you have this pull request, and you can say you can't just merge it because there is an issue. So one way to go with is to use the command line and do this. But what we say here is merge pull request in github.com. So this is the most important thing. We always do it that way. We do it on the website. So here you have the web editor. So in the web editor, you can see you have these two sections, like two parts of the code that came on different paths separately. You can pick something. So I'm going to go with the upper one. I'm going to delete this. So you do this on the web because you can see the things and it's easier to do. This is not the only way to do that, but this is how we do in this particular workflow because it's simpler. So I delete that and I resolve it. And then I commit it to the organization. And I merge it. Now I have, do I have the, now I send this here and I get rid of this. Now what should I do? I should get this here from the repository main organization to my personal account. So for that, what I do is I create a pull request from organization to my personal account. And you can, and I create the pull request. So always pay attention to that arrow from which to which, and then I merge it. So now this one is coming here. And now I can get it down. So what do I do? So then if I look at the main.java, I have the newer one. So I have basically got the bolded one to my computer. And I have got rid of the older one. So this is one workflow where you do all the merge conflicts on the repository organization. That way you don't have to use the command line to do merge conflicts on your local computer, which is a reasonably easy way of doing things. So this is my suggestion as how you should start this. So is this clear? So if you have any doubts, please ask and get them clarified because this can be a little complicated. Okay, then someone going to ask a question. Okay, so I'll just summarize once more. So we first talked about why virtual control systems were needed and the function, which was snapshots and backups. And Git is a complicated thing, but people can figure out an easy way of using that for their project. And then why Git is decentralized and why it's fast. And there is something called patches we don't use here. We use pull requests, and that you should start with the minimum number of features. Then we looked at the bigger picture of Git, which is a little bit complicated, but then we went for a down or east out way, and then we looked at what Git is and how Git fits into the bigger picture with GitHub, which is a commercial thing with multiple features. Then we looked at what markdown is and that you can use markdown easily by putting a .md extension on GitHub any file, and then you can use readme.md for individual folders as well as the main repository, and you can create a yourname.github.io website for your account. And then you can have individual project pages by docs folder. And then we looked at what is expected out of your unified project documentation. and then there is a list of requirements which is posted on fields, and then we have a small workflow which is work for like 3-member groups. So it's always create the repository in the organization, fork it, clone it down, work on your computer, then add, commit, push, then do everything that is collaborative on the online github.com, pull requests as well as merge conflicts. Do everything there and then just pull it to the local. So no merge conflicts, no patches, no nothing on your local. So that is the easy way to get started. But down the line, you will learn there are efficient ways to do that. For that, we created this example and we learned that. And we handled the merge conflict on the organization level. And on conclusion, there are a few things that you would like to read about. One is Git patches. So if you look at Linus Torvalds, so he's maintaining the Linux kernel. They are not working through GitHub pull requests. They have a GitHub interface, but they are working from patches. So learn what patches are. So instead of all this GitHub thing, you can just email a patch as a tarball. That's an interesting way, something nice to learn, read and learn that. Then there is something called branches. So here, throughout this presentation, we worked only with the main branch, but there are multiple branches in bigger projects. Learn how to use that, but it will be a little bit confusing in the start. So master this workflow first, then go for branches. Then instead of doing by the command line, there is a way to get Git into your IDE or text editor. That might make your life easy if you are into IDEs or text editors. If not, just use the command line. Then there is an idea called cherry picking in Git, which is how to go back to a particular piece of code very easily. That's called cherry picking. Read about that. You will always use that when you are doing a project. And then there is something called Jekyll Markdown, which is a way, instead of just Markdown rendering, this you can use for beautiful websites. I think there was one such website, can't remember which group that was, but there was like one group has used Jekyll Markdown. It's more aesthetic work, but learn that. Then learn what SVN is and why SVN failed and Git became the thing. So SVN is a older version control system. And then there is something called GitHub pages and custom domains. Read that. So instead of the website.github.io, you can use your own domain names with GitHub pages. Read a little bit about that. And then there are two interesting articles if you have time to take a look. This has nothing to do with the academic work, but there is something called Arctic Code Vault. GitHub has a plan to save all the code we have written for 10,000 years, like they saved seeds in case of if there is some situation where the all life on Earth goes away, like dies, to bring back the civilization. So GitHub has a plan to keep the code so that the next civilization will be able to run our code and create technology very fast. And then there is a interesting historical slash political article debate going on. Like earlier it was master branch, but now it's main branch. Why that happened, that might also be of interest to you if you are into those type of things. So thank you. Any questions?
Guys, with this done, we expect everyone to use GitHub, the repos that you're creating, and the organization, and keep your projects up to date, project repos up to date, as well as these markdown pages. Okay. So you know that we've been started these forum pages, forum blogs in our fields page. Now what you can do is you can link your forum post to your markdown page on GitHub. Right? So you don't have to update two things. You can keep updating the GitHub by your page. If you have any doubt, please ask. Gihan will clarify those for you. Looks like there are no questions. We can wind up here.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for attending, and thanks for suggesting that I do this.
Gihan will be, of course, available in our WhatsApp group, so you can catch him there if you need you for anything.
Yeah, and please accept the invitations because they expire after a while. At the moment, only one request is pending, and that is
Hariharan, are you here?
so. Thanks everyone. Good luck with the project.
Thank you, Gihan. Thank you very much for the session.
Okay, you're most welcome.
You can stop recording by the way.